What you're about to read will completely change how you see the homeless people you pass on the street every single day. Because sometimes the person society has forgotten is about to become richer than most Fortune 500 CEOs combined. Meet Thomas McCarthy, a 58-year-old man who had been living on the streets of downtown Chicago for the past 7 years. Every morning, he would wake up on a piece of cardboard behind Millennium Park, fold his single blanket with the precision of a soldier making his bed, and begin his daily routine of survival that most people couldn't imagine enduring for even a single day. Thomas wasn't always homeless. Once upon a time, he had been a successful mechanical engineer, owned a modest home in the suburbs, and had a wife named Sarah who made the best apple pie in 3 counties. But life has a cruel way of stripping everything away from a person, piece by piece, until they're left with nothing but the clothes on their back and the strength to face another day. It started when the factory where Thomas had worked for 23 years suddenly closed down. The company moved their operations overseas, leaving 2,400 employees without jobs and without much hope in a town that had already been struggling economically. Thomas was 51 then, an age where starting over feels impossible, and employers see you as a liability rather than an asset. The unemployment benefits ran out after 6 months. Their savings, which they thought would last a year, evaporated in 4 months between mortgage payments, utilities, and Sarah's medical bills. Sarah had been battling diabetes for years, and without the company health insurance, her medications became a choice between staying alive and keeping their home. Thomas took odd jobs, anything he could find. He worked construction when his back allowed it, did landscaping for neighbors who paid cash, and even tried his hand at driving for a rideshare company with their aging Toyota Camry. But it wasn't enough. The bills kept coming like waves against a crumbling seawall, relentless and unstoppable. The foreclosure notice came on a Tuesday morning in March. Sarah cried for 3 hours straight, not because she was afraid of losing the house, but because she felt like she had failed Thomas. The woman who had stood by him through everything, who had celebrated every promotion and comforted him through every setback, now felt like a burden. They moved into a small apartment, then a smaller one, then a single room in a boarding house that smelled like cigarettes and desperation. Sarah's health continued to decline, and the stress of their situation wasn't helping. She needed regular dialysis, but the waiting lists at free clinics were months long, and the emergency room visits were bankrupting what little they had left. When Sarah passed away on a cold February morning, Thomas felt like his soul had been ripped from his body. She died holding his hand in a hospital bed, whispering that she loved him and that everything would be okay. But Thomas knew nothing would ever be okay again. The funeral costs took the last of their money. Thomas found himself completely alone for the first time in 31 years of marriage, with no job prospects, no savings, no family nearby, and a grief so profound that some days he forgot to eat or drink water. The descent into homelessness happened faster than anyone might expect. Without Sarah's disability benefits, Thomas couldn't afford even the boarding house room. He spent his first night sleeping in his car, telling himself it was temporary, that he would figure something out in a few days. But days became weeks, and weeks became months. The car eventually broke down, the transmission gave out, and Thomas didn't have the $3,000 to fix it. The towing company took it away, and suddenly, Thomas was carrying everything he owned in 2 garbage bags. The streets of Chicago became his world. He learned which doorways provided the best shelter from the wind, which restaurants threw away food that was still edible, which police officers would let him sleep, versus which ones would move him along with threats and harsh words. Right now, as you're reading this, there's a voice in your head commenting on these very words. Maybe it's agreeing, maybe it's skeptical, maybe it's already wandering off to think about what you have for dinner tonight. And here's the shocking truth that will change everything you think you know about your mind. That voice isn't you. Those thoughts aren't under your control, and every attempt you've made to control them has actually made the problem worse. What if I told you that a Greek Armenian mystic who died nearly a century ago discovered the secret to mastering your thoughts, not by controlling them, but by doing something that seems completely counterintuitive? What if the solution to the chaos in your mind isn't more discipline, more willpower, or more positive thinking, but something called the witness technique that turns everything you've been taught about mental control completely upside down? Stay with me, because what you're about to learn will revolutionize your relationship with your own consciousness. This isn't just another self-help technique. This is a complete paradigm shift that will show you why every method you've tried before has failed, and why the ancient wisdom of George Ivanovich Gurdjieff holds the key to a kind of mental freedom you've never experienced. Let me start with a question that will expose the fundamental illusion you've been living under. Who is thinking your thoughts right now? Take a moment. Really consider this. Who is the thinker behind the thoughts that are flowing through your mind at this very instant? Most people would answer, I am, without hesitation. But Gurdjieff would tell you that this answer reveals the depth of your sleep, the extent to which you've been hypnotized by the mechanical operations of your own mind. The truth that Gurdjieff spent his entire life teaching is both simple and devastating. You are not your thoughts. You are not the voice in your head. You are not the endless stream of mental chatter that dominates your inner experience from morning until night. You are something far more profound, far more essential, and far more free than the mechanical thinking apparatus that you've mistaken for your true self. But before we dive into what you actually are, let's explore why you can't control your thoughts, because understanding this is crucial to everything that follows. The reason you can't control your thoughts isn't because you lack discipline or willpower. It's not because you haven't found the right meditation technique or because you're not trying hard enough. The reason you can't control your thoughts is because the entity you think is doing the controlling, the I that you believe yourself to be, is itself just another thought. Think about this carefully. When you try to control your thoughts, what is exactly doing the controlling? Another thought? When you tell yourself to stop thinking about something, what's doing the telling? A thought. When you try to focus your mind, what's doing the focusing? More thoughts. You're using thoughts to control thoughts, which is like lifting yourself up by your own shoelaces. It's mechanically impossible, and yet, this is exactly what millions of people attempt to do every single day. Gurdjieff called this the tragedy of identification. We identify completely with the mechanical operations of our minds, believing that we are the thinker of our thoughts, the experiencer of our emotions, the decider of our actions. But what if all of this is just an elaborate illusion? What if what you call yourself is actually just a complex pattern of automatic reactions, mechanical thoughts, and unconscious habits that have been running on autopilot for so long that you've forgotten there's anything else? This is where the witness technique comes in, and here that Gurdjieff's teachings become truly revolutionary. Instead of trying to control your thoughts, instead of fighting with your mind, instead of attempting to suppress or direct the stream of mental activity, the witness technique teaches you to do something completely different, to step back and observe. But this isn't ordinary observation. This isn't the kind of casual attention you might pay to a movie or a conversation. This is what Gurdjieff called self-observation or self-remembering, and it's perhaps the most radical practice ever discovered for transforming human consciousness. When you truly witness your thoughts, not judge them, not analyze them, not try to change them, but simply observe them with pure non-judgmental awareness, something extraordinary happens. You begin to realize that if you can observe your thoughts, you cannot be your thoughts. Let me give you a practical example of how this works. Right now, notice that there are thoughts happening in your mind. Maybe you're thinking about whether this technique will work for you. Maybe you're remembering something that happened earlier today. Maybe you're planning what you'll do after you finish reading this. Whatever the thoughts are, simply notice them. Don't try to stop them. Don't judge them as good or bad. Don't engage with their content. Just observe them as if you were watching clouds pass through the sky. As you do this, something remarkable begins to emerge. You start to recognize that there are two distinct elements present: the thoughts themselves and the awareness that is observing the thoughts. The thoughts come and go, appear and disappear, change and transform, but the awareness that observes them remains constant, unchanging, present. This awareness is what Gurdjieff pointed to as your true nature, your essential self, what he sometimes called the higher being body, or simply I am. This distinction between the observer and the observed is the foundation of all genuine spiritual development, and it's why the witness technique is so powerful. Most people, when they saw Thomas, would look right through him, as if he were invisible. Businessmen in expensive suits would step around him without breaking stride, their eyes focused on their phones, as if acknowledging his existence might somehow contaminate their successful lives. Soccer moms would clutch their purses tighter and hurry their children past him, whispering warnings about dangerous people, loud enough for Thomas to hear. Teenagers would sometimes point and laugh, making jokes about the crazy homeless guy, as if poverty were a character flaw rather than a circumstance. There were exceptions, of course. Maria, who worked at the coffee shop on State Street, would sometimes slip him a free coffee and a day-old sandwich. She never made a big show of it, never asked for gratitude or tried to make herself feel better by forcing Thomas to share his story. She just saw a human being who needed help and provided it quietly. Father Rodriguez from St. Patrick's Cathedral would sit with Thomas sometimes, not to preach or convert, but just to talk. He treated Thomas like the intelligent, educated man he was, discussing everything from the Cubs' latest season to the philosophy books Thomas had read back when he had a library card and a permanent address. But these kindnesses were rare islands in an ocean of indifference and hostility. Most days, Thomas felt like a ghost haunting a world that had moved on without him. What none of these people knew, what Thomas himself didn't know, was that 1,200 miles away, in a law office in Boston, Massachusetts, a team of private investigators had been searching for him for the past 3 months. The story begins with Eleanor Whitmore, Thomas's great-aunt on his mother's side, a woman he had met exactly twice in his entire life. Eleanor had been what people politely call eccentric, and what others less charitably described as the crazy rich aunt. Eleanor had never married, had no children, and had spent her 89 years accumulating one of the largest private fortunes in New England through a combination of brilliant investments, strategic real estate acquisitions, ownership of several major corporations, and an almost supernatural ability to predict market trends decades before they happened. She owned entire city blocks in Boston, commercial properties throughout New York, stock portfolios that made financial advisors weep with envy, a collection of rare artwork that the Louvre had attempted to purchase multiple times, and business interests that generated millions in passive income monthly. More importantly, Eleanor had never forgotten the quiet, thoughtful boy she had met at 2 family funerals decades earlier. Thomas had been 12 the first time, standing solemnly beside his mother at his grandfather's funeral, and 24 the second time, at his mother's funeral, where he had approached Eleanor afterward to thank her for the flowers she had sent. Both times, Eleanor had been struck by Thomas's genuine kindness and his old soul wisdom. While other relatives had made small talk about the weather or complained about the food at the reception, Thomas had asked Eleanor about her travels, listened to her stories with genuine interest, and treated her with the respect that others in the family seemed to think her wealth didn't deserve. When Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep at her Beacon Hill mansion, her will contained a surprise that shocked even her longtime attorney, William Hendricks, who had handled estates for some of the wealthiest families in America. The bulk of her $520 million estate, including multiple mansions, the rental properties spanning 3 states, the corporate holdings, the stock portfolio, and the priceless art collection, was left to my great-nephew, Thomas Michael McCarthy, last known to be residing in the Chicago, Illinois area. The will contained a letter that Eleanor had written specifically for Thomas, sealed and to be opened only by him. In it, she explained that she had chosen him not because he was family, but because in their brief encounters he had shown her a kindness and genuine interest that had stuck with her for decades. Thomas, the letter read, I don't know what circumstances you find yourself in as you read this, but I want you to know that I have thought of you often over the years. Your mother spoke of you with such pride, and in our brief meetings, I saw in you a soul that understood that wealth means nothing if it's not paired with compassion. I hope this inheritance, which represents my life's work and the fruits of decades of careful planning, allows you to rebuild whatever life you choose, and perhaps to show the same kindness that you showed to an old woman at funerals long ago. Use this fortune not just for yourself, but to prove that humanity and kindness are worth more than gold. But there was a problem. Thomas had essentially disappeared. The last address the legal team could find for him was a suburban home that had been foreclosed on 6 years earlier. They had hired 3 different private investigation firms, and all had come up empty. Thomas's former neighbors had no idea where he'd gone. His old employer had no forwarding address. There were no credit cards, no bank accounts, no phone records, no digital footprint whatsoever. In a world where everyone leaves electronic breadcrumbs wherever they go, Thomas McCarthy had become a ghost. The lead investigator, a former police detective named Janet Morrison, had dealt with plenty of missing persons cases, but this one was different. Usually, people who disappeared didn't want to be found, but everything about Thomas's history suggested he was a decent man who had fallen on hard times, not someone running from the law or from debts. Janet's breakthrough came when she decided to think differently about the search. Instead of looking for Thomas McCarthy, the former homeowner and engineer, she started looking for Thomas McCarthy, the homeless man. She contacted shelters, soup kitchens, and social services departments throughout the Chicago area. Most had no records. Many homeless people avoid services that require identification or paperwork. But Janet got lucky at the For the Presbyterian Church, where volunteers kept informal notes about the people they served meals to twice a week. Tom, one of the volunteer coordinators, told Janet, quiet guy, always says thank you, never causes any trouble. Hasn't been in for a few weeks, but he comes and goes, polite as can be. Sometimes helps clean up without being asked. The description matched, but Janet needed to be certain. She asked if anyone had a photo. I might, said Maria Santos, who had been volunteering at the church for 5 years. I take pictures sometimes for our newsletter to show the community the faces of the people we serve. Let me check. Maria scrolled through hundreds of photos on her phone until she found one from 3 months earlier. There, accepting a plate of food with a grateful smile, was Thomas McCarthy. Thinner than in his old driver's license photo, with longer hair and a beard, but unmistakably the man they had been searching for. Janet showed the photo to other volunteers and social workers in the area. Several recognized him. They called him Tom, or the Professor, because of his vocabulary and the thoughtful way he spoke. He was known for helping elderly homeless individuals find warm places to sleep and for sharing food even when he had very little himself. But nobody knew exactly where he was staying. The homeless community is fluid, constantly moving to avoid police sweeps, bad weather, and violence from both criminals and vigilantes who target vulnerable populations. Janet decided to spend several days walking the streets, showing Thomas's photo to shopkeepers, security guards, and anyone else who might have regular contact with the homeless population. It was Maria from the coffee shop on State Street who finally provided the crucial information. "Tom?" she said when Janet showed her the photo. "Of course I know Tom. He's good people. Comes by most mornings, never asks for anything, but I get him coffee when I can. He usually sleeps behind the Millennium Park area, near the loading dock behind the Art Institute. But you didn't hear that from me. I don't want him getting in trouble." Jenna assured Maria that Thomas wasn't in any legal trouble, that she had good news for him, but she understood the woman's protective instincts. That evening, as the sun set over Lake Michigan and the temperature began to drop toward what would be another freezing November night, Janet walked through the area Maria had described. She found several homeless encampments, but no sign of Thomas. It was on her third evening of searching that she finally spotted him. Thomas was sitting on a bench near the lake, staring out at the water as boats returned to harbor for the night. He was wearing a worn brown jacket that had seen better years, dark pants with patches on the knees, and boots that were holding together more through willpower than actual structural integrity. Janet approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. Many homeless people have developed hypervigilance as a survival mechanism, and sudden movements or loud voices can trigger fight or flight responses. "Excuse me," she said softly when she was still several feet away. "Are you Thomas McCarthy?" Thomas looked up, and Janet could see wariness in his eyes. When you live on the streets, unexpected questions from strangers usually mean trouble. "Depends who's asking," Thomas replied. His voice was hoarse from the cold and from not speaking much during the day. Janet sat down on the opposite end of the bench, giving him space, and pulled out her identification. "My name is Janet Morrison. I'm a private investigator working for the law firm of Hendricks, Walsh, and Associates in Boston. Mr. McCarthy, I've been looking for you for 3 months, and I have some news that's going to sound impossible." Thomas studied her ID carefully. In his previous life, he would have been more trusting, but life on the streets teaches you that nothing is ever what it seems, and people who approach you with good news usually want something. "What kind of news?" Thomas asked. Janet took a deep breath. "Sir, your great-aunt Eleanor Whitmore passed away 4 months ago. She left you your entire estate in her will. Mr. McCarthy, you've just inherited approximately $520 million. Thomas stared at her for a long moment, then began to laugh. It started as a chuckle, then built into full-bodied laughter that echoed across the empty park. But there was no joy in the sound. It was the laughter of a man who had heard too many cruel jokes and developed dark humor as a defense mechanism. "Lady," he said when he finally caught his breath, "I appreciate whatever this is, some kind of social experiment, reality TV show, psychological study, but I'm not in the mood. It's going to be cold tonight, and I need to find a warm place to sleep." Thomas started to stand up, but Janet gently placed a hand on his arm. "Mr. McCarthy, I know how this sounds. I know that in your situation this must seem like someone playing a cruel trick. But I swear to you, on my daughter's life, this is real. Your great-aunt Eleanor Whitmore died in Boston, and she left you everything. I have legal documents in my hotel room that prove it." Something in Janet's voice made Thomas pause. He had developed a pretty good radar for detecting lies. When you're vulnerable, people lie to you constantly, making promises they never intend to keep. But Janet sounded genuinely sincere. "Eleanor Whitmore?" Thomas said slowly. "I barely knew her. Met her twice in my whole life, at funerals." "She remembered you," Janet said. "She left you a letter explaining why she chose you. Mr. McCarthy, there are lawyers in Boston waiting to meet with you. There's a mansion in Beacon Hill that's legally yours as of 4 months ago. There are bank accounts and stock portfolios and real estate properties worth more money than most people can imagine." Thomas sat back down heavily on the bench. Even if this is true, even if you're not lying or crazy, I can't just walk into some law office looking like this. I don't have identification that isn't expired. I don't have clean clothes or a shower or any way to prove I'm who you say I am. Janet smiled for the first time since she'd found him. Mr. McCarthy, when someone inherits $520 million, lawyers tend to be very accommodating about things like appearances and paperwork. We can get you a presidential suite tonight, a complete wardrobe tomorrow, and I can help you get replacement identification. The law firm has been authorized to advance any reasonable expenses, and with your inheritance, reasonable has a very generous definition. Thomas looked out at the lake again, watching the lights from the city reflect on the dark water. He asked, "Why? Why would she leave me anything? I was nobody to her." "According to the letter she left, you were kind to her. In a family where most people only paid attention to her because of her money, you treated her like a person. Apparently, that meant more to her than you realized." For the first time in years, Thomas felt something he had almost forgotten existed: hope. Not the desperate hope of finding a warm place to sleep or a free meal, but real hope for a future that extended beyond mere survival. "If this is real, if you're not lying or crazy, then I want to do something meaningful with it. I want to help people, like me, people who society has written off. With that kind of money, I could build entire communities, fund programs, change systems." Janet nodded. "Mr. McCarthy, with $520 million, you could help tens of thousands of people. You could fund entire social programs, build housing complexes, establish foundations that will help people for generations. But first, let's get you somewhere warm for the night and figure out the next steps." As they walked away from the bench, Thomas turned back to look at the spot where he had been sitting. Tomorrow, that bench would be empty, and some other homeless person might claim it for the night. But Thomas McCarthy, the man everyone had ignored, the invisible ghost haunting the streets of Chicago, was about to become one of the richest people in the city. The irony wasn't lost on him. Every person who had walked past him without a glance, every person who had treated him like he was less than human, had unknowingly ignored a man who was about to inherit more wealth than most corporations are worth, more money than entire cities' annual budgets. But as they walked toward Janet's rental car, Thomas wasn't thinking about revenge or about proving anything to the people who had dismissed him. He was thinking about Maria, who had given him free coffee out of simple kindness. He was thinking about Father Rodriguez, who had treated him with dignity when dignity was the one thing he thought he'd lost forever. He was thinking about all the other people still sleeping on cold streets, still invisible to a world that had forgotten they existed. Thomas McCarthy had just learned he was rich beyond imagination. But more importantly, he had learned that even when the world tries to strip away everything that makes you human, sometimes life has a way of proving that your humanity was there all along. The transformation wouldn't happen overnight. There would be lawyers to meet, documents to sign, and a new life to figure out how to live. But as Thomas got into Janet's rental car and felt warm air from the heater hit his face for the first time in months, he knew that Eleanor Whitmore had given him more than money. She had given him the opportunity to show the world that the homeless man everyone ignored had never stopped being human, had never stopped caring about others, and had never lost the capacity for kindness that had impressed a wealthy old woman at 2 family funerals decades ago. Sometimes the people society discards are the ones most worthy of society's respect. And sometimes, just sometimes, the universe has a way of proving that point in the most spectacular way possible. Thomas McCarthy was about to find out that being rich wouldn't change who he was inside, but it would give him the power to change who everyone else could become.